My husband held my hand in the hospital bed, smiled softly, and said, "Only 3 days." Finally. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "Your house and your money, they'll be mine now." I didn't cry. I didn't pull my hand away. I just stared at the ceiling and counted my breaths because something inside me went very quiet. I'm glad you're here with me. Because what happened next isn't just about betrayal. It's about what people are capable of when they think you're already dead. The room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Machines hummed beside me, steady and cold, measuring how much time my body supposedly had left. A nurse adjusted the floor. A doctor had spoken in careful sentences earlier that morning, the kind doctors use when they don't want to say the word dying out loud. 3 days. That was what they told us. My husband, Mark, sat beside my bed like a grieving saint. His fingers were warm around mine. His eyes were wet, but something about his smile didn't match them. It was too calm, too relieved. I didn't understand it then. We had been married for 11 years, long enough to learn each other's silences, long enough to know when a touch was love and when it was something else pretending to be. When the doctor left, Mark stayed behind. He closed the door. He squeezed my hand tighter. "That's not the worst part," he said softly. Then he smiled. I remember thinking, why does he look like this is good news? He talked about paperwork, about how hard things would be for him, about how I wouldn't have to worry anymore. He said things like, "I'll take care of everything, and you won't feel a thing." And then came the line I'll never forget. "Finally," he whispered, "only 3 days." People always ask me later why I didn't confront him right then, why I didn't call a nurse, why I didn't scream. The truth is, when someone shows you who they really are, your body reacts before your mind does. Mine went still, like an animal hiding in tall grass. That wasn't fear. That was survival. I nodded. I let my face relax. I even squeezed his hand back. I let him believe I was already gone. Because what Mark didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the diagnosis wasn't as final as he thought. And what he also didn't know was that I had been listening to him for months before this hospital bed. I had noticed the late nights, the sudden interest in my will, the way he asked about passwords and insurance just in case. I told myself I was imagining things, that love doesn't rot quietly. I was wrong. When Mark finally left that night, he kissed my forehead and said, "Get some rest. You won't need strength anymore." That was the moment I made my decision. As soon as the door closed, I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd use. The cleaning lady. Her name was Rosa. And the first thing I said to her was, "I need your help. And if you do exactly what I ask, you'll never have to work again." What Rosa told me next changed everything. Before I go any further, let me pause for just a moment. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. Now let me take you back to before the hospital bed, before the machines, before my husband's smile stopped feeling human. My name is Angela Brooks. I was 42 years old when my life quietly began to crack. I lived in a modest 2-story house outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy. White siding, creaky stays, a small backyard where I tried and failed to keep roses alive. But it was mine. Paid off with years of overtime, skip vacations, and careful planning. Mark and I met in our early 30s. He was charming in a quiet way. Not loud, not dramatic. The kind of man people described as steady. That word followed him everywhere. Steady job, steady marriage, steady presence. For a long time, I believed it. I worked in insurance processing. Long hours, predictable stress. Mark worked sales, commission-based. Some months were good, some were not. I carried the health insurance. I carried most of the savings. We joked about it, lightly. He said, "You're the responsible one." That line comes back later. Our life was simple. Weekend groceries, Netflix nights, occasional dinners with neighbors where Mark laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Nothing that screamed danger. Nothing that warned me. But looking back now, I see the small shifts. The way he stopped asking about my day. The way he became interested in things he'd never cared about before. Documents, deeds, beneficiaries. One night, months before the hospital, he asked, "Do you ever think about what happens if one of us dies?" I laughed it off. I said, "Morbid question." He smiled and said, "Just planning ahead." That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how often he said it after that. When I got sick, it didn't happen all at once. It started with exhaustion that sleep didn't fix, then bruises that appeared without reason, then pain that sat deep and quiet, like something waiting. The diagnosis came fast, too fast, a blur of tests, hushed conversations, sympathetic looks. The word aggressive used more than once. Mark became perfect in public, held my hand, spoke gently to doctors, told friends he was staying strong. People praised him. "She's lucky to have you," they said. He soaked it in. At home, things were different. He spent more time on his phone, took calls outside, started locking his laptop. He asked for my passwords in case I forget. He asked where important documents were kept. Once, when I hesitated, he laughed and said, "Relax. You won't need them." I didn't understand it then. Rosa had been cleaning our house once a week for nearly 5 years. Quiet, observant, always polite. She noticed things I didn't. Like when Mark started coming home early on days he claimed to be working late. Like the unfamiliar perfume on his jacket. She once asked me softly, "Are you okay, Senora?" I said yes. I said everything was fine. I believed marriage meant endurance. That love sometimes looked like silence. I told myself sickness changes people. That fear makes men strange. But fear doesn't explain smiles like that. By the time I was admitted to the hospital, Mark already knew where everything was. The house, the accounts, the policies. He knew which pen I used to sign things. That's why, when he left my hospital room that night, after whispering about his 3 days, I didn't call a lawyer. I called Rosa, because I realized something terrifying and clarifying at the same time. Mark wasn't waiting for me to die. He was counting on it. And what Rosa revealed next made me realize how long he'd been planning this. Rosa didn't answer right away when I told her I needed help. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that makes your heart beat louder than it should. Then she said, very calmly, "I was wondering when you would call." That sentence landed heavier than the diagnosis. I asked her what she meant. My voice sounded steady, but my hand was shaking so badly I had to press it against the mattress. Machines kept humming beside me, indifferent to the fact that my world was tilting. Rosa told me she had noticed changes in Mark months ago. Not just small ones. Patterns. Habits. The kind you don't see unless you're quiet and invisible in someone else's home. She said he started coming back after work on days he said he'd be late. She said he asked her questions, casual at first, about where I kept documents, whether I seemed tired, whether I was confused sometimes. He asked me if you were forgetful, she said. If you ever signed things without reading. I remember whispering, why would he ask that? Rosa didn't hesitate, because he wanted to know how easy it would be. That wasn't the worst part. She told me about an afternoon when I was at an appointment and Mark came home early. He didn't know Rosa was still there, cleaning the guest bathroom. She heard him on the phone in the kitchen. He wasn't whispering. 3 days, maybe less, he said. Yeah, everything's already lined up. Rosa stayed very still, afraid he'd hear her breathing. I felt my chest tighten as she spoke. Not from the illness, from something colder. I asked her who he was talking to. She said she didn't hear a name. Just laughter. Just Mark sounding happy. After that day, Rosa started paying attention. She noticed documents moved. Drawers opened. She noticed Mark bringing home envelopes and locking them in his office. She noticed he stopped treating her like help and started treating her like a risk. He told me I might not be needed much longer, she said. He said, things are changing. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't fear talking. This was a plan. I told Rosa about the doctor's words, about the 3 days, about Mark's smile when he thought no one was watching. There was another pause. Then Rosa said something I'll never forget. Senora, doctors are not always right. She told me she had overheard a nurse earlier that week, speaking quietly at the station. My name had come up, not with pity, with uncertainty. She said your numbers were strange, Rosa explained. Not like someone who is leaving. I felt something flicker inside me for the first time since the diagnosis. Hope scared me more than fear, because hope meant if I survived, Mark would have to explain himself, and I wasn't sure what he was capable of when cornered. I asked Rosa why she was telling me all this now. Her voice softened. Because he asked me to witness a signature, she said. I sat straight up in bed. She told me Mark had brought papers home 2 weeks earlier. He told her they were end-of-life arrangements. He asked if she could sign as a witness if I was too weak. I said no, she told me. He didn't like that. That was the moment my doubt became certainty. I realized Mark wasn't just waiting. He was rushing. I asked Rosa one final question that night. Are you willing to help me prove it? She answered without hesitation. Yes, she said. But you must do exactly what I say. And that's when I understood. The sickness wasn't the inciting event. Mark's impatience was, because what he planned to do next, what he didn't realize I already knew, forced me to move faster than he ever expected. And the very next morning, he walked into my hospital room with papers in his hand. Mark came into my hospital room the next morning carrying a thin manila folder, tucked under his arm like it was nothing important. He was smiling again. That same soft, careful smile he used when other people were watching. I knew before he said a word. Just some paperwork, he said lightly. Routine stuff. Rosa's voice echoed in my head, his rushing. I asked him to sit. My voice sounded weaker than I felt, and I let it. Weakness made him careless. He pulled the chair close to my bed, opened the folder, and laid the papers across the tray like he was setting a table. He didn't look at me when he started explaining. He talked fast. Too fast. He said it was about simplifying things. About making sure I didn't have to worry. About how stressful decisions could be at a time like this. Then he slid the pen into my hand. Sign here, he said. It's just temporary. That line hit hard. Temporary. I glanced down at the page without really reading it, the way he wanted. But Rosa had prepared me. She had told me exactly what to look for. The words jumped out like they were underlined in red. Durable power of attorney. Immediate effect. This wasn't end-of-life planning. This was control. I looked up at him and asked, quietly, what happens if I don't sign? He blinked. Just once. Then he smiled wider. Why wouldn't you? I told him I was tired. I told him I needed a minute. I watched his jaw tighten just slightly before he nodded and stepped into the hallway. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I did next. With shaking fingers, I reached for my phone and took photos of every page. Then I texted them to Rosa, just like she told me to. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed. He changed everything, she wrote. She told me Mark had been moving money. Not all at once. Small amounts. Quiet transfers. She had seen bank statements in the trash weeks ago. She hadn't understood them then. Now she did. Mark came back in, still smiling, and asked if I was ready. I asked him a simple question. Why does this take effect immediately? His smile froze for half a second. Because emergencies don't wait, he said. I nodded. I let my shoulders sag. I let him believe I was giving in. But instead of signing, I asked for water. I asked for the nurse. I asked for time. His patience cracked. Angela, he said, lowering his voice, we don't have time for delays. That sentence told me everything. People who are grieving don't rush. People who are planning do. The nurse came in, and Mark stepped back into his role. Concerned husband. Gentle voice. He slipped the folder away like it was nothing. When the nurse left, he leaned close and whispered, "This would be easier if you trusted me." I met his eyes and said, "I do." That lie tasted bitter. Later that afternoon, Rosa came to the hospital pretending to visit. Mark didn't recognize her without her uniform. He barely looked at her. She sat beside my bed, held my hand, and whispered, "He made a mistake." She told me Mark had left his laptop open that morning. Just for a moment. Long enough. She had taken photos. Not just of bank accounts. Of emails. One thread caught her attention. The subject line read, "After." After what? After me. That email chain was between Mark and a woman named Lena. They talked about timelines. About moving in. About renovations. About how everything would be settled soon. I didn't cry when Rosa showed me. I felt something colder settle in my chest. This wasn't just about money. He had already planned his life without me. And now I knew something else. If I didn't act soon, I might not get another chance. Because Mark was no longer waiting for the 3 days to pass. He was trying to make sure they did. That night, after Mark left the hospital, I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny cracks between them. The machines kept their steady rhythm, but my mind didn't follow. It moved fast, sharp, alert. Pain had done its job. Now it was finished. What came next wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was clarity. I understood something very simple. If I acted like a dying woman, Mark would finish what he started. If I acted like a woman waking up, he would panic. So I did neither. I became cooperative. The next morning, when Mark returned, I smiled first. I reached for his hand before he reached for mine. I apologized for being difficult the day before. I was scared, I told him. I trust you. He relaxed immediately. His shoulders dropped. His voice softened. People like Mark mistake surrender for victory. I asked him to bring the papers back later. I told him I wanted to do things right. I asked if we could talk about the house, the savings, the plans he would have after. That word, after, lit something in his eyes. He talked freely. Too freely. He told me he would sell the house. He said it was too many memories. He mentioned traveling. Starting over. He didn't say Lena's name, but I could hear her in every sentence. "You won't need to worry anymore," he said again. While he talked, I planned. Rosa came by that afternoon, this time in uniform. Mark barely acknowledged her. That suited us fine. She adjusted the flowers, the blankets, the pillows, quietly placing my phone where Mark couldn't see the screen. We had agreed on 3 steps. No more. No less. First, delay. Second, document. Third, expose. I asked for a new doctor. I said I felt uncertain about the prognosis. I asked for more tests. Mark didn't like it, but he didn't stop it. Not yet. "Why drag this out?" he asked once. I smiled. "Because I want to be sure." The second step was easier than I thought. Mark left traces everywhere once he believed he had won. He brought documents home. He made calls in the hallway. He whispered plans he thought I couldn't hear. I recorded everything. His voice saying, "She won't need this." His laughter when someone said, "Soon." His frustration when delays happened. The third step was the hardest. Exposure doesn't begin with confrontation. It begins with witnesses. Rosa contacted a legal aid clinic she trusted. Quietly, carefully, she told them everything. They told her what Mark's documents really meant. Fraud, coercion, intent. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building a case. One afternoon, Mark leaned close to me and said something that sealed it. "Once you sign," he whispered, "everything becomes simple." I nodded, but inside, I felt something shift completely. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. 2 days later, the doctor returned with updated results. Different results. Cautious results. The kind that didn't fit Mark's timeline. Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes that day. "What does that mean?" he asked sharply. The doctor said more observation was needed. More time. I watched Mark's hand tighten into a fist. He was losing control. That was the moment I knew. The storm was coming, and I wasn't the one in danger anymore. Because the very next time Mark brought me papers, I was ready to sign. Mark brought the papers in the evening, just as the hallway lights dimmed and the floor went quiet. He looked tired. Not worried, irritated. like a man delayed at the finish line. This won't take long, he said, placing the folder on my tray again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I asked him to read it aloud. I said my eyes hurt. I said I wanted to hear it, one last time. He rolled his eyes, just slightly, then began. His voice was steady at first, confident. As he read, I watched his reflection in the window. I watched the way he skipped sentences, the way he summarized instead of reading, the way he avoided certain words. When he reached the signature page, I lifted my hand. Who's the witness? I asked. He froze. We don't need one, he said quickly. I shook my head. Rosa said I should have one. That name hit him like a slap. His face drained of color. Why are you talking to her? I didn't answer. I picked up the pen. I let my hand tremble, just enough to sell it. If I sign, I said softly, promise me something. He leaned in. Anything. I looked him straight in the eyes. Tell me the truth. There it was, the smallest pause, the flicker of calculation. Then the smile returned. You don't need the truth, he said. You need peace. I smiled back. Then I pressed the call button. The nurse entered first, then the doctor, then two people Mark had never seen before, one from hospital administration, one from legal services. Rosa stood quietly in the doorway. Mark stood up fast. What is this? I spoke clearly, calmly, stronger than I had in weeks. I'm refusing to sign, I said, and I'd like to report coercion. The word hung in the air. Mark laughed once, too loud. She's confused, he said. She's very sick. The doctor shook his head. She's lucid, he said, and improving. That wasn't the worst part. The legal representative placed a folder on the table, my folder. Photos, screenshots, audio transcripts, emails between Mark and Lena, bank transfers, drafts of documents with dates that didn't match his story. Rosa hadn't just watched. She had collected. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. This is a misunderstanding, he said. The nurse pressed play on my phone. His voice filled the room. She won't need this anymore. Silence. Then another clip. Once you sign, everything becomes simple. Mark backed away from the bed like it had burned him. You recorded me, he whispered. I nodded. You taught me how to listen. Security arrived next. Calm. Professional. They asked Mark to step outside while things were clarified. He argued. He demanded. He called me ungrateful. After everything I've done, he said. I met his eyes one last time. You did this, I said. As they escorted him out, he looked back at me, not with love, not with regret, but with fear, because he finally understood. The timeline was gone. The control was gone. And the story was no longer his. I lay back against the pillows, exhausted, shaking, but alive. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The hospital felt different after Mark was taken out of my room. Quieter, lighter, like the air itself had finally stopped holding its breath. I didn't feel victorious. I felt emptied out, the way you do after surviving something you didn't know you were strong enough to endure. I slept for almost 12 hours straight. When I woke up, Rosa was sitting beside my bed, folding a sweater she'd brought from home. She smiled when she saw my eyes open. Not a big smile, a relieved one. It's over, she said softly. But it wasn't. Not yet. The next few weeks blurred together in a way that felt unreal. Doctors ran more tests. The diagnosis changed. The word terminal disappeared. It was replaced with phrases like treatable and monitor closely. I cried when I heard that, not out of joy, but because my body finally let go of the fear it had been holding. Mark wasn't allowed near me anymore. I heard about him through other people, about how he tried to explain himself, how he said he was just preparing, how he blamed stress, fear, love twisted into concern. I was trying to protect her, he told anyone who would listen. But protection doesn't rush signatures. Protection doesn't hide money. Protection doesn't smile at timelines. The house went quiet after I returned home. Too quiet. Every room felt like an echo of something that no longer existed. I packed Mark's things slowly, carefully, not because I cared, but because I needed to reclaim the space piece by piece. I found things I hadn't known about. Receipts, notes, a printed email from Lena that read, "Soon, we can stop pretending." I didn't tear it up. I filed it. The legal process took months. Long, exhausting months. But I wasn't alone anymore. Rosa sat with me during meetings. She translated when my mind felt foggy. She reminded me to breathe. Mark lost access to everything. Accounts were frozen. Documents voided. His 3 days turned into court dates and silence. One afternoon, I received a message from Lena. Just one line. I didn't know. I didn't reply. Because knowing isn't the same as caring. And caring isn't the same as choosing differently. I focused on rebuilding. Not just my health, but my sense of self. I changed the locks. I painted the bedroom. I planted new roses in the backyard, even though I still didn't know how to keep them alive. Some survived. Some didn't. That felt honest. People asked me if I hated Mark, if I wanted revenge, if I felt satisfied. The truth is simpler. I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished justifying. Finished shrinking to keep someone else comfortable. The hardest part wasn't exposing him. It was accepting that the man I loved never existed the way I believed he did. But acceptance brings a strange kind of peace. At night, when the house finally felt like mine again, I would sit on the edge of the bed and think about that hospital room. About the moment he thought he had won. And I would whisper to myself, "You're still here." That wasn't the ending he planned. And it wasn't the ending I feared. It was simply the ending I earned. People sometimes ask me when I knew it was really over. Not the marriage, but the fear. They expect me to say it was the moment Mark was escorted out of my hospital room, or when the court finalized everything, or when I heard the doctor say the word treatable. But that's not the truth. The fear ended much earlier. It ended the moment I stopped trying to be the woman someone else needed me to be, and became the woman who listened to herself. I think we're taught, especially as women, to doubt our instincts, to soften our suspicions, to explain away discomfort so we don't seem dramatic, ungrateful, or paranoid. We're told love means endurance, that silence is strength, that questioning someone who claims to love you is a kind of betrayal. But here's what I learned. Real betrayal doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers. It smiles. It waits for you to be weak. I didn't survive because I was brave. I survived because I paid attention. Because I noticed the small things that didn't sit right. Because I asked for help when my pride told me not to. Because I chose delay over denial. And because I didn't sign. There are moments in life when the smallest decision changes everything. One pause. One question. One refusal to rush when someone else is desperate for speed. It's just paperwork. You won't need this anymore. Trust me. Those words almost cost me everything. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels off, even if you can't explain it yet, please hear me when I say this. Confusion is not weakness. Unease is not imagination. And asking questions is not disloyal. Sometimes the danger isn't the illness. It's the person standing beside the bed. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because I know someone out there is sitting quietly with doubts they've convinced themselves to ignore. Someone who's being rushed. Someone who's being told not to think too hard. Think anyway. Pause anyway. Protect yourself anyway. I lost a marriage. I lost an illusion. I lost the future I thought I had planned. But I kept my life. I kept my voice. And I kept the right to decide what happens next. That's not revenge. That's survival. And if my story stays with you, if it made you feel seen or less alone, then it was worth telling. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. The moral is simple. When someone rushes you toward silence, slow down and listen to the truth trying to save you.